I'm Morgan, 32, and I just discovered my family's betrayal through an Instagram notification. There they were, my parents, brother, and sister-in-law smiling beneath the Eiffel Tower. The same Paris trip supposedly cancelled due to budget issues 2 months ago. As I zoomed in on their carefree faces, my phone lit up. Mom calling. Probably to catch up while strolling along the Seine. My hands trembled as I answered, waiting to hear what possible excuse could justify this. Before I dive into this heartbreaking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever felt betrayed by family, and subscribe to join our community of survivors. Trust me, what happened next will show you exactly why setting boundaries changed my life forever. It all began 3 months ago at our monthly family dinner. My parents' home was filled with the usual aromas of Mom's pot roast and Dad's specialty apple pie. My brother Dennis and his wife Heather had arrived before me, already sipping wine in the living room when I walked in after a long day at the marketing firm where I'd recently been promoted to executive level. Morgan, finally, you're here. We have exciting news. My mother Catherine was practically bouncing as she hugged me. My father Richard stood by the fireplace with an uncharacteristically broad smile. We're planning a family trip to Paris for our 35th anniversary, Dad announced, putting his arm around Mom's shoulders. All of us, you, Dennis, Heather, we want to celebrate as a family. I couldn't contain my excitement. Paris? Are you serious? I'd dreamed of visiting Paris since college, where I'd minored in French. I'd practiced the language for years, watched countless French films, and even had a Paris-themed corner in my apartment, with vintage posters and books about the city. We've already started looking at accommodations, Mom said, pulling out her iPad to show me the charming apartments they were considering in the Marais district. We'll go for 2 weeks in June. Over dinner, we discussed all the places we wanted to visit: the Louvre, Montmartre, Notre Dame, boat rides on the Seine. I offered to research the best local restaurants and lesser-known attractions. This is going to be amazing, Dennis said, lifting his glass. To family in Paris! For the next several weeks, I threw myself into planning. I created a shared document with day-by-day itineraries, including opening hours for museums, recommendations for the best times to visit popular attractions to avoid crowds, and translations for useful phrases. I even took a refresher French course online to ensure I could help everyone navigate. Every conversation with my parents involved excited updates about flight options, travel insurance, and packing recommendations. I'd spend my lunch break shopping for comfortable walking shoes and weather-appropriate clothes. I even bought a new camera specifically for the trip. Then came the call, exactly 2 months before our departure date. Morgan, we need to have a family meeting tonight, my father said, his voice oddly flat. When I arrived at their house that evening, the atmosphere was completely different from our planning dinner. Mom's eyes were downcast, Dad looked uncomfortable, and Dennis and Heather sat silently on the couch. We have some difficult news, Dad began once I'd sat down. We need to cancel the Paris trip. My heart sank. What? Why? We've had some unexpected financial issues, Mom explained, not quite meeting my eyes. The timing just isn't right anymore. Dad cleared his throat. Some investments didn't pan out as expected, and we just can't justify the expense right now. I was crushed but immediately concerned for my parents. I understand. I'm so sorry to hear about the financial troubles. Is everything okay otherwise? Do you need help? No, Dad said quickly. We'll be fine. It's just this large expense that doesn't make sense right now. What if I chip in more for my portion? I offered. I've been saving up and could cover more of the costs. Mom shook her head. That's sweet, honey, but it would still be too much of a burden right now. Maybe next year. I looked around at everyone's disappointed faces. Dennis and Heather remained unusually quiet, and something about their exchanged glances felt off. But I was too focused on my parents' apparent financial distress to give it much thought. Well, Paris has been there for centuries. It'll still be there when the time is right, I said, forcing a smile. We can plan an even better trip when finances improve. I hugged my parents before leaving, assuring them it was okay, and offering again to help if they needed anything. As I drove home, I couldn't help but feel the ache of postponed dreams, but family came first. If they were struggling financially, the last thing they needed was pressure about a vacation. Little did I know that their financial concerns were the first in a series of carefully crafted lies designed to exclude me while taking advantage of my generosity and loyalty. The Instagram notification that shattered my world came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was sipping coffee before heading to work when my phone pinged with a notification that Dennis had tagged my mother in a post. I opened it without thinking, expecting to see photos from a local restaurant or family gathering. Instead, there they were, my entire family standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, champagne glasses raised in a toast. The caption read, "Day 3 inches Paris with the family, celebrating mom and dad's 35th in style." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Day 3? This wasn't a last-minute trip. This was our planned family vacation, the one supposedly cancelled due to budget issues happening without me. With shaking hands, I scrolled through Dennis's profile and found more photos. My parents at Notre Dame, Heather posing in front of sidewalk cafes, all of them enjoying a river cruise on the Seine. There were at least a dozen photos spanning 3 days. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was my mother. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hi, sweetheart. Just calling to catch up. How are things going?" Her voice was cheerful, with the sounds of a bustling street in the background. "Where are you, Mom?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the churning in my stomach. A pause. "Oh, just out running errands. What's up with you?" "That's strange, because according to Instagram, you're in Paris with Dad, Dennis, and Heather." The line went silent for a moment. Then, "Oh, Morgan, I was going to tell you when we got back. It was all very last minute." "Last minute? The photos show you've been there for 3 days already, Mom. In the exact places we planned to visit together." "Well, your father's investments actually turned around unexpectedly, and Dennis found some great flight deals." Her excuses tumbled out awkwardly. "We didn't want to make you feel bad, knowing how busy you are at work." I hung up without responding, a flood of emotions overwhelming me: betrayal, anger, confusion, and beneath it all, a deep, aching hurt. This wasn't just about missing a trip to Paris. This was about being deliberately excluded by the people I trusted most. The people for whom I had consistently put my own needs aside. Throughout my life, I had been the reliable one in our family. When Dennis got into legal trouble during college for drunk driving, my parents used $15,000 of my college fund to pay for his attorney. "You have scholarships," they reasoned. "Dennis needs this more right now." I ended up working 2 jobs to cover my remaining expenses while maintaining a 3.8 gigapascals. When my mother needed surgery 3 years ago, I took 6 weeks of unpaid leave to care for her, draining my savings in the process. When my father's business faced a downturn, I lent him $10,000 from my house down payment fund, which he promised to repay but never mentioned again. Time and again, I had been there for them, making sacrifices without complaint because that's what family does. But apparently, their definition of family didn't include me when it came to something I had dreamed about for years. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Alicia. "You okay? You haven't responded to my messages." I hadn't realized she'd been texting. I called her immediately and broke down as soon as she answered. "They went to Paris without me," I sobbed, explaining the situation. "Morgan, I'm so sorry," Alicia said after listening to the whole story. "But I have to say, I'm not entirely surprised." "What do you mean?" "I've watched how they treat you for years. You drop everything when they need something, but when's the last time they prioritized you? Remember when they missed your graduate school graduation for Dennis's football game? Or when they forgot your 30th birthday but threw Heather a surprise party the same month?" As Alicia spoke, memories flooded back: countless instances where my needs had been secondary, my achievements downplayed, my sacrifices expected rather than appreciated. "You've been their safety net and ATM for years," Alicia continued gently. "But when it comes to including you in something special, something you've literally dreamed about forever, suddenly, there's a budget issue that magically resolves itself once you're out of the picture." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Had I been so blind to the pattern, so desperate for their approval that I'd normalized their treatment of me? "But why?" I whispered. "Why would they do this?" "I don't know, Morgan. But it's time you start asking that question. And more importantly, it's time you start valuing yourself the way you deserve to be valued, because they clearly don't." After hanging up, I sat motionless, staring at the Paris photo on my phone. The Eiffel Tower sparkled behind their smiling faces, mocking my naivety and misplaced loyalty. Something shifted inside me that day, a foundation cracking, a truth I could no longer ignore about my place in my own family. Little did I know that their betrayal was about to reach a whole new level of audacity. Exactly 7 days after discovering the Paris photos, my phone rang with my father's number. I had been ignoring calls from my family all week, needing space to process my feelings, but something told me I should answer this one. Morgan, thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you, my father said, his voice tight with what sounded like stress. I've been busy, I replied coolly. Listen, honey, I need to ask a favor. He paused. I'm in a bit of a financial bind with the business. I need to secure a loan of $5,000 to cover an unexpected expense. It's just temporary. I'll pay you back within 30 days. The audacity of his request left me momentarily speechless. After lying to me about canceling a family trip due to budget issues, then taking that very trip without me, he was now asking for money? You need $5,000? I finally managed to say, yes. It's for a supplier payment that's past due. If I don't pay it immediately, I could lose my biggest client. His explanation sounded rehearsed. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. You know that. Dad, you just returned from a 2-week vacation in Paris. A trip you told me was canceled due to financial problems. There was a brief silence. That's different, Morgan. That money was specifically set aside for the anniversary. This is about the business. So you had money for a luxury vacation but not for your biggest client? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. His tone shifted, becoming defensive. Morgan, after everything your mother and I have done for you, I would think you'd want to help your family in a crisis. We've always supported you. The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Almost. I need to think about it, I said finally. I don't have time for you to think about it. I need an answer now. His voice had an edge I rarely heard. Then my answer is no. Morgan, after all we've done for you, all the sacrifices we've made, this is how you repay us? I'll call you tomorrow, Dad. I hung up before he could continue. My hands were shaking as I texted my friend Zoe, asking if she could meet for coffee. An hour later, we sat in our favorite cafe, the background chatter providing a sense of normalcy that felt foreign to me now. He actually asked you for money right after they excluded you from the Paris trip. Zoe was incredulous after hearing the story. That's next-level entitlement. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Part of me still feels guilty for saying no. What if his business really is in trouble? Morgan, listen to me. Zoe leaned forward. This pattern with your family isn't new. You've been their financial and emotional safety net for years, and they've taken advantage of your generosity repeatedly. The question isn't whether his business is in trouble. The question is why you're always expected to be the solution to their problems, while they exclude you from the good times. I knew she was right, but decades of conditioning were hard to overcome. What would happen if you said no and stuck to it? Zoe asked. Have you ever actually done that before? I thought about it. Not really. I always give in eventually. Maybe it's time to find out what happens when you don't. That evening, I decided to do some investigating. I logged onto Facebook and checked Dennis's recent activity. There, in a comment thread with a friend, was my answer. Yeah, looking at the new Audi this weekend. Dad's helping with the down payment. The pieces clicked into place. The urgent business expense was likely for Dennis's new car. Again, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. Have you made a decision? Need to know as soon as possible. I stared at the message, a strange calm replacing the turmoil of the past week. For the first time, I was seeing my family dynamics with perfect clarity. I was valued not for who I was, but for what I could provide: money, care, reliability, while they gave nothing in return. I typed a response. I've thought about it, and my answer is still no. I'm not in a position to lend money right now. His reply was immediate. Very disappointing, Morgan. Your mother and I raised you better than this. I turned off my phone and sat in the silence of my apartment, feeling something unexpected beneath the hurt, relief. Setting a boundary, even this small one, felt like taking the first breath after being underwater too long. But I knew my family wouldn't accept this new boundary without a fight. Sunday dinner was in 2 days, and I decided it was time for a long overdue confrontation. Sunday arrived with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Before heading to my parents' house, I printed out evidence of their deception, screenshots of their Paris photos with timestamps, details of the trip they'd claimed was canceled, and a record of my father's financial request following their return. I also prepared emotionally, rehearsing what I wanted to say, and setting clear intentions. I would remain calm, stick to facts, and not allow myself to be manipulated or diverted. When I arrived, everyone was already seated at the dining table. Mom was serving her traditional Sunday roast, Dad was pouring wine, Dennis and Heather were showing photos on their phones, likely from Paris. "Morgan, there you are." Mom greeted me as if nothing was wrong. "We missed you last Sunday." "I bet you did," I replied evenly, taking my seat. "I was curious to hear about your trip." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Dennis shot a glance at my father, who cleared his throat. "It was a last-minute opportunity," he began with the practiced excuse. "We didn't want to bother you since you're always so busy with work." I nodded, letting them believe I was accepting this explanation. I waited until we were midway through the meal before placing my folder on the table. "I've been thinking a lot about our family dynamics lately," I began, "specifically about honesty and respect." My mother's smile faltered. "What do you mean, dear?" "I mean, the Paris trip wasn't a last-minute decision. It was our planned family trip that you told me was canceled due to budget issues." I opened the folder. "Here are your original itinerary emails from 3 months ago, matching exactly with the places you visited according to your Instagram posts." "Morgan, you never showed much interest in Paris anyway," my mother said dismissively. "You barely participated in the planning." I stared at her in disbelief. "I created our entire itinerary. I took French refresher classes. I bought a new camera specifically for the trip." "Well, you're always so wrapped up in your work," Dennis chimed in. "We figured you'd end up canceling at the last minute anyway." "That's not true. I requested the time off months ago and told all of you about it." Heather shook her head. "You know, Morgan, some people make family a priority instead of just their careers. The trip was important to your parents." The gaslighting was in full swing now, each of them contributing to an alternate reality where I was the self-centered workaholic who couldn't be bothered with family time. "It was just a small trip," my father added. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill." "A small trip?" I pulled out more papers. 2 weeks in Paris, staying in a luxury apartment, dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, the same trip you claimed was canceled due to financial problems, right before asking me for $5,000. "That money was for my business," my father insisted. "It had nothing to do with the Paris trip." I slid over the Facebook screenshot showing Dennis's comment about the new Audi and my father helping with the down payment. "Is this the business expense you needed my money for?" Dennis's face reddened. "You're spying on my Facebook now? What's wrong with you?" My mother's strategy shifted. "Morgan, sweetie, I think you're overreacting. We've always supported your independence. Not everything is about you." "This isn't about me being included in everything. This is about being deliberately lied to and then asked for money by the same people who excluded me." "Here we go again." Dennis rolled his eyes. "Morgan making everything about herself. Some things never change." "When have I ever made anything about myself?" I challenged him. "When I gave up my college fund for your legal fees? When I took unpaid leave to care for Mom after her surgery? When I lent Dad money for his business that was never repaid?" "We're your family," my father's voice rose. "That's what family does for each other. Apparently only when it's me doing for you, not the other way around." The tension in the room was suffocating. My mother's eyes welled with tears, a tactic she'd often used when confronted. "How can you say such hurtful things? After all we've sacrificed for you?" "What exactly have you sacrificed for me?" I asked quietly. No one answered. "I think Morgan's jealous," Heather finally said. "She can't stand that we had a good time without her." That was when I realized nothing I could say would penetrate their united front of denial and deflection. They were committed to their narrative where I was selfish, overly sensitive, and making a big deal out of nothing. I gathered my papers and stood up. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn a place in this family, but I'm starting to wonder if I've been trying to fit into a space that doesn't exist." "Oh, stop with the dramatics," Dennis scoffed. My father's expression hardened. "If this is about the money, Morgan, just say so. Not everything needs to be turned into a soap opera." I looked around at their faces, defensive, annoyed, completely unmoved by my pain, and felt something break inside me. Not my heart, but the chains of obligation and desperate hope for their approval that had bound me for so long. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner," I said, and walked out. In my car, the tears finally came, not delicate, dignified tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that left me gasping for air. I wasn't crying for the Paris trip anymore, but for the decades I'd spent trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it freely. For the little girl who believed if she was just good enough, responsible enough, generous enough, her family would finally see her value. I drove home in a daze, questioning everything I thought I knew about my family and my place within it. Was I crazy for feeling so hurt? Was I really the selfish one for expecting basic honesty and inclusion? The gaslighting had been so effective that I was starting to doubt my own perceptions. I fell asleep that night feeling more alone than I ever had before, not knowing that an unexpected ally was about to emerge and reveal even darker secrets about my family's betrayal. The call came at 8:30 the next morning. "Morgan? It's your Aunt Susan. Do you have time to talk?" Aunt Susan was my mother's older sister. They'd had a strained relationship for years, and she rarely attended family functions. I'd always liked her independent spirit, but didn't know her well. "Of course," I said, surprised by her call. "I heard about what happened yesterday." Her direct approach was refreshing after my family's evasions. "Dennis called your mother right after you left, and she called me to complain about your ungrateful behavior. I thought you might need a friendly ear." I hesitated, wary of family politics. "It was just a misunderstanding about a trip." "Morgan, I've known your mother all my life. There are no misunderstandings with Catherine, only calculated decisions." Her frankness caught me off guard. "Would you be willing to meet for coffee? There are things you should know." 2 hours later, we sat at a quiet corner table in a cafe I'd never visited before neutral territory. "I've watched how they treat you for years," Susan began after we'd settled with our drinks. "I stayed quiet because it wasn't my place, but after hearing your mother's version of events, I can't remain silent anymore." "What did she say?" I asked. "That you had a meltdown over not being included in a family trip, that you're jealous of Dennis, and that you refused to help your father when his business was in trouble." Susan shook her head. Classic Catherine rewriting reality to make herself the victim. "I don't understand why they deliberately exclude me and then lie about it." "Because you're the family resource, not the family member," Susan said bluntly. "You're valued for what you provide: money, care, reliability, not for who you are." Her words echoed what Alicia and Zoe had said, but hearing it from someone who had known my family for decades made it impossible to dismiss. "Your mother has always been this way," Susan continued. "When we were growing up, she would charm people, use them, and discard them. I watched her do it to friends, boyfriends, even our parents. When she met your father, I thought she might change, but he turned out to be cut from the same cloth." Susan took a deep breath. "The Paris trip? Your parents asked me for money to help fund it." "What?" I was stunned. "They told me they were taking you and needed extra money to make it special for everyone. I gave them $3,000 as an anniversary gift, specifically because they said you were finally getting to see Paris." The betrayal cut even deeper. They had used my dream of seeing Paris to extract money from Susan, then used that money to take the trip without me. "There's more, Morgan. Your parents have borrowed money from at least 5 other family members in the past year alone, always with dramatic stories about temporary hardships. None of them have been repaid." As Susan spoke, a clearer picture emerged. My parents were not just occasionally manipulative but consistently exploitative. Dennis, their golden child, had learned the same behavior. His history of financial irresponsibility wasn't despite their parenting, but because of it. They had taught him that others would always clean up his messes. "Why are you telling me all this now?" I asked. "Because I see myself in you," Susan admitted. "I spent decades trying to earn my sister's approval, lending her money, helping her out of jams, only to be discarded when I was no longer useful. It took me until my 50s to set boundaries. I don't want you to waste as many years as I did." By the end of our conversation, Susan and I had formed an unlikely alliance. She suggested I speak with Ryan, the family financial advisor who had recently stopped working with my parents. The next day, I met Ryan at his office. "I normally wouldn't discuss clients, even former ones," he said carefully, "but there's something you need to know that directly affects you." He pulled out a file and placed several documents before me. "These are loan applications with your signature on them. Did you authorize these?" I looked at the papers in shock. 3 different loans totaling over $15,000. All with my name and what appeared to be my signature as co-signer. "No, I never signed these." Ryan nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. "I thought as much. The most recent one from 3 months ago was what made me sever ties with your parents. The signature didn't match your previous documentation, but they insisted it was genuine." My hands trembled as I examined the forgeries. "What does this mean for me legally?" "As of now, one of the loans is in default. Since you're listed as a co-signer, it's affecting your credit. That's why I felt ethically obligated to alert you." Identity theft. by my own father. The room seemed to tilt as the implications hit me, not just the financial impact, but the profound violation of trust it represented. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of such news," Ryan said gently. "But you needed to know." I left his office, with copies of all the fraudulent documents, my mind racing with questions. How long had this been happening? What else had they done in my name? The $15,000 loan in default explained why I'd recently been declined for an apartment. I'd applied for an apartment I'd lost the deposit on because of my suddenly problematic credit score. With each revelation, the foundation of what I'd believed about my family crumbled further. What I had interpreted as occasional selfishness was actually a systematic pattern of exploitation and abuse, financial, emotional, and now, potentially criminal. Susan's words echoed in my mind. "You're the family resource, not the family member." The Paris trip wasn't an isolated incident but a symptom of a much deeper disease at the heart of my family relationships. As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of devastation and clarity. The fog of confusion and self-doubt was lifting, replaced by a cold, hard understanding of exactly who my family was and what they thought of me. I didn't yet know how I would respond, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days after meeting with Ryan, I received an official notice in the mail from Coastal Credit Union regarding a defaulted loan. The letter stated that as co-signer, I was now responsible for the remaining balance of $15,843.92 plus late fees and interest. Payment was expected within 30 days to avoid further legal action. I sat on my kitchen floor, the letter clutched in my hand, as a wave of dizziness washed over me. This wasn't just about family betrayal anymore, this was fraud with real-world consequences that could follow me for years. My credit score had already dropped by nearly 100 points. The apartment I'd been saving for was now out of reach. Even my car insurance rates had increased, due to the credit check they'd run during renewal. With shaking hands, I called my father. He answered on the first ring, his voice cautiously pleasant. "Morgan, I was hoping you'd call. Your mother and I think we should." I just received a notice about a defaulted loan with my name on it. I cut him off. "A loan I never signed for." A beat of silence. "Oh, that. It's just a misunderstanding with the bank. I'll take care of it." "Did you forge my signature on loan documents?" Another pause. "I wouldn't call it forging. You've co-signed for me before. This was just a temporary solution when you weren't available. I was going to tell you about it." His casual dismissal of identity theft left me breathless. "This is fraud, Dad. It's a crime." "Don't be so dramatic, Morgan. It was for the family. I've always taken care of these things. The loan is in default. It's destroying my credit. I lost my apartment deposit because of this." "Well, if you had lent me the $5,000 like I asked, I could have made the payments," he said, somehow twisting this to be my fault. "I'll take care of it when I can." "You need to be patient." "Patient? You committed identity theft, and now you're trying to make me feel guilty about it?" "It was temporary," he insisted. "Just until things turned around. I did what I had to do for the family." "For the family? Or for Dennis's new car?" His tone hardened. "You've always been jealous of your brother. This attitude isn't helpful, Morgan." I hung up, too angry to continue. Within minutes, my phone was ringing again, this time. "Dennis. What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded without preamble. "Dad's really upset after your call. He forged my signature on loans, and now one's in default. My credit is ruined." "Oh, please. It's not that big a deal. He was going to pay it off." "Then why hasn't he? And why use my name without telling me?" "Because he knew you'd overreact, just like you're doing now." Dennis's voice dripped with contempt. "You know what your problem is? You've always thought you're better than the rest of us with your fancy job and your perfect credit score. This isn't about me thinking I'm better than anyone. This is about Dad committing fraud in my name. He's telling everyone you've been acting really unstable lately," Dennis continued, ignoring my point. "Mom's worried you're having some kind of breakdown. First the scene at dinner, now these accusations." The realization hit me like a physical blow. They were already working to control the narrative, painting me as mentally unstable to discredit anything I might say about their actions. After hanging up on Dennis, I received a flurry of text messages from extended family members, all expressing concern about my well-being. The campaign to undermine me had already begun. The stress became physical, my chest tight, my breathing shallow, a migraine forming behind my eyes. I called in sick to work the next day, something I rarely did, but I couldn't focus on anything beyond the spiraling crisis. Around noon, I collapsed in my bathroom, hyperventilating. My neighbor heard me fall and called an ambulance after I didn't respond to her knocking. I spent the night in the hospital, diagnosed with an acute anxiety attack. The doctor recommended a week of medical leave and referred me to a therapist specializing in family trauma. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, the doctor told me. Whatever stress you're under, it's taking a physical toll. As I lay in the hospital bed, my phone continuously lit up with messages, not from family asking if I was okay, but from my mother demanding to know why I was spreading lies about my father. From Dennis telling me to stop the drama. From relatives I barely spoke to expressing disappointment in how I was treating my loving parents. It was my rock bottom moment, alone in a hospital room, physically ill from stress. My family not only unconcerned with my well-being but actively working to undermine me. When a nurse came to check my vitals and saw me crying, she sat beside my bed. "Family trouble?" she asked gently. I nodded, unable to speak through the tears. "I've been there," she said. "Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the most deeply." "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "They've taken so much from me." She patted my hand. "Then maybe it's time to stop giving." That simple statement clarified something for me. I had spent my entire life giving my time, my money, my energy, my love to people who only took, who saw me not as a daughter or sister but as a resource to be exploited, who would destroy my financial future without hesitation if it served their needs. The realization was both devastating and liberating. If I continued allowing this treatment, nothing would change. My family would take and take until there was nothing left of me. As I was discharged the following day, still shaky but resolute, I made two decisions. First, I would protect myself legally and financially from further damage. Second, I would reclaim my life from the toxic patterns that had nearly destroyed me. I didn't yet know exactly how to accomplish either goal, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. It was time to assemble a team of professionals who could help me navigate the challenging path ahead. The old Morgan might have given in, made excuses for her family's behavior, paid the fraudulent debt to keep the peace. But that Morgan had been hospitalized by her own family's actions. The Morgan who checked out of the hospital was different, wounded but wiser, afraid but determined. As I signed the discharge papers, I realized something important. This breaking point wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one where I wrote the rules and protected my own heart. After my hospital stay, I took the full week of medical leave recommended by my doctor. Instead of using that time to rest, however, I began methodically building a strategy to protect myself and address the damage my family had done. My first step was consulting with Jamie Peterson, a financial attorney specializing in identity theft. I brought all the documentation from Ryan and the default notice from the credit union to our meeting. "This is a clear case of identity theft," Jamie confirmed after reviewing the papers. "The fact that it was committed by a family member doesn't change the legal implications." "What are my options?" I asked. "You have two main paths," she explained. "You can file a police report and press charges for identity theft, which would likely result in criminal proceedings against your father. Or you can handle it privately by demanding that he take full responsibility for the debt and restore your credit." The thought of my father facing criminal charges made my stomach turn, despite everything. "What does the private route look like?" "We'd draft a formal agreement stating that he acknowledges forging your signature, assumes full responsibility for all debts in your name, and commits to specific steps to repair your credit. We'd include strict timelines and consequences for non-compliance. And if he refuses to sign or comply," Jamie's expression turned serious, "then the criminal route becomes your only option if you want to protect yourself financially. Without legal intervention, you remain liable for these debts." It was a sobering reality. I might have to choose between my financial future and keeping my father out of legal trouble. The fact that he had put me in this position reflected just how little he valued my well-being. My next appointment was with Dr. Bennett, a therapist specializing in family trauma and financial abuse. She listened carefully as I recounted the events of the past weeks, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. "What you're describing is a pattern of both emotional and financial abuse," she said when I'd finished. Your family has systematically exploited your generosity, while conditioning you to feel responsible for their well-being and guilty for setting any boundaries. Financial abuse? I'd never considered applying that term to my situation. Financial abuse occurs when someone exerts control or causes harm through financial means, forging your signature on loans, manipulating you into giving money, damaging your credit. These are textbook examples, Dr. Bennett explained. And based on what you've shared, this pattern has existed for most of your life. I always thought I was just helping my family, I said quietly. That's part of the conditioning. You were taught that your role was to provide resources without expecting anything in return, not even basic respect or inclusion. Over the next few days, I continued building my support network. Aunt Susan connected me with her accountant to help assess the full damage to my finances. My friend Zoe helped me find a new apartment with a landlord willing to look beyond my credit score after hearing my situation. My work mentor Lisa was understanding about my medical leave and offered to adjust my projects to reduce stress upon my return. With each conversation and appointment, I began to see my family's behavior through others' eyes, and the universal shock and concern I encountered confirmed that what I'd experienced wasn't normal or acceptable. The validation strengthened my resolve to break free from their manipulative grip. I also began documenting everything, creating a comprehensive file of evidence, including all fraudulent loan documents with forged signatures, bank statements showing money transfers to my parents, text messages and emails containing manipulative language, medical records from my hospitalization due to anxiety, timeline of events surrounding the Paris trip deception, screenshots of family social media posts contradicting their claims, records of unpaid loans to family members over the years. This documentation served two purposes: legal protection if needed, and a concrete record I could review whenever self-doubt or guilt threatened to pull me back into old patterns. Dr. Bennett helped me understand the concept of fog: fear, obligation, and guilt, the three mechanisms my family had used to control me. We worked on recognizing these tactics and developing responses that didn't involve capitulating to their demands. Your family will escalate when they realize their usual methods aren't working, she warned. They may recruit others to pressure you, make threats, or suddenly act loving and contrite. These are all attempts to regain control. Sure enough, as days passed without me giving in to their demands, the strategy shifted. My mother left tearful voicemails about how my abandonment was affecting my father's health. Dennis's wife Heather reached out, claiming she never knew about the loans and wanted to help mediate. Relatives I rarely spoke with called to tell me how concerned everyone was and how I needed to make peace with my parents. I recognized these tactics for what they were now: not genuine concern, but coordinated efforts to pressure me back into my role as the family resource. By the end of the week, I had assembled a clear picture of the financial damage. Approximately $27,000 in fraudulent debts in my name, a credit score dropped by 120 points, and nearly $40,000 in loans to family members that would likely never be repaid. Jamie prepared a formal agreement for my father, outlining his admission of forging my signature on 3 specific loans, his commitment to pay off all fraudulent debts within 90 days, steps to correct my credit report, including formal letters to credit bureaus, a notarized statement taking full responsibility for the fraud, financial penalties if any terms were breached, my agreement not to pursue criminal charges if all terms were met. With Aunt Susan's support, I also prepared for a final confrontation with my family. We carefully reviewed what I would and wouldn't say, how to respond to likely manipulation attempts, and when to walk away if necessary. Remember, Susan advised, they will try to make this emotional because emotions are easier to manipulate than facts. Stay focused on the concrete issues and don't get drawn into debates about feelings or intentions. The night before the planned confrontation, I sat in my apartment reviewing all the documentation and practice scenarios. A text from Lisa appeared on my phone. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that their response reflects on them, not on you. You're doing what any reasonable person would do to protect themselves. For the first time in weeks, I slept without nightmares or anxiety. I had moved beyond the paralysis of betrayal and hurt into purposeful action. Whatever happened next, I was no longer operating from a position of confusion or fear. I was reclaiming my power, one careful step at a time. The confrontation was set for 2 p.m. on a Saturday at my parents' house. I chose the location deliberately; they would feel more comfortable on their home turf, potentially lowering their defenses. I arrived 15 minutes early, parking down the street to collect my thoughts before entering what would likely be the most difficult conversation of my life. Jamie, my financial attorney, accompanied me as we had agreed. Her presence would underscore the seriousness of the situation and provide a witness to whatever transpired. Aunt Susan waited in her car nearby, available for support if needed but not directly involved in the initial conversation. When we entered, my parents, Dennis, and Heather were already seated in the living room. Their expressions ranged from my father's cold anger to my mother's performative concern to Dennis's dismissive smirk. Heather looked uncomfortable, the only one seemingly uncertain about her role in this family drama. "This is Jamie Peterson," I introduced my attorney calmly. "She's here to help us navigate this situation legally." "A lawyer?" My mother's hand flew to her chest. "Morgan, what are you thinking? This is a family matter. Identity theft and fraud are legal matters, regardless of who commits them," Jamie replied before I could. We sat down, and I placed my folder of evidence on the coffee table between us. "I've asked you here to address some serious issues and present a path forward," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "Dad forged my signature on multiple loans totaling over $27,000. One of these loans is now in default, which has severely damaged my credit and caused me significant financial harm." "Those loans were for family expenses," my father interrupted. "You've always been willing to help before." "Willing is the key word," I said. "I was never given the opportunity to be willing or unwilling in this case because you forged my signature without my knowledge. I was going to tell you, after the fact, after my credit was already damaged, after I lost my apartment deposit because of the credit check." I maintained eye contact despite his glare. "What you did is identity theft. It's a felony." The word felony shifted the atmosphere in the room. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine concern in my father's eyes. "You wouldn't press charges against your own father," my mother said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and threat. "I don't want to," I admitted. "That's why I'm here with a proposal instead of the police." Jamie handed copies of the agreement to each person. "This document outlines a path to resolve this situation without criminal charges." As they read through the terms, their expressions darkened. Dennis was the first to react. "This is ridiculous. You're treating Dad like a criminal." "Your father committed multiple felonies," Jamie pointed out matter-of-factly. "This agreement is considerably more generous than what the law would provide." My father looked up from the document, his face flushed with anger. "You expect me to pay off all these loans in 90 days? That's impossible." "You found money for a Paris vacation. You found money for Dennis's new car," I said evenly. "I'm sure you can find money to fix the damage you've caused to my financial future. We're your family, Morgan." My mother tried a different approach, her voice softening. "Families help each other through difficult times. We've always been there for you." This was the moment I'd prepared for with Dr. Bennett, the appeal to family loyalty, the rewriting of history to position them as my supporters rather than exploiters. "When have you been there for me?" I asked. "When you used my college fund for Dennis's legal fees? When you excluded me from the Paris trip while lying about financial problems? When you forged my signature on loans?" "You're twisting everything," Dennis interjected. "We've all made sacrifices. Name one sacrifice any of you have made for me." The challenge hung in the air. No one spoke. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. My father attempted intimidation next, standing up suddenly. "I will not be threatened in my own home by my own daughter." I remained seated, maintaining my composure. "This isn't a threat, Dad. It's a choice, your choice. Sign the agreement and make this right, or I file a police report on Monday. Those are the only options now." "You'd really do that to your father? To this family?" My mother's voice quavered with calculated emotion. "You did this to the family when you decided my financial future was less important than your desires," I replied. "I'm just refusing to be your victim anymore." A tense silence filled the room. Heather, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. "I think you should sign it, Richard," she said, surprising everyone. "What you did was wrong. If you'd done this to me, my father would have pressed charges immediately." Dennis shot her a betrayed look, but she continued. "Morgan's being more than fair here." Her unexpected support created a crack in their united front. My father sat back down heavily, the fight seeming to drain from him. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll sign your damn agreement." "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out another document. "I want a full accounting of any other financial instruments, accounts, or loans in my name that I don't know about." If I discover anything after today that isn't disclosed now, I will press charges immediately, agreement or no agreement." My father and mother exchanged a glance that confirmed my suspicions there was more. "A credit card," my father finally admitted. "In your name, we used it for expenses." "What's the balance?" Jamie asked. "About $12,000. I felt physically ill, but maintained my composure. "That needs to be added to the agreement and paid off as well." As Jamie updated the paperwork, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Dennis stared at his phone, clearly disengaged now that the confrontation wasn't going as planned. My mother dabbed at non-existent tears. My father looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before. "Why?" I finally asked the question that had haunted me for weeks. "Why would you do this to me?" My father wouldn't meet my eyes, but my mother surprisingly answered. "You've always had everything come so easily to you," she said, a hint of bitterness in her tone. "Perfect grades, scholarships, good job, promotions. Nothing has ever been a struggle for you like it has been for us." For Dennis, the revelation stunned me. My success, which I had achieved through hard work while simultaneously supporting them, had bred not pride but resentment. They hadn't excluded me from Paris because they didn't want me there. They had excluded me because they couldn't stand to see me enjoy something they believed I didn't deserve. "That's why you took from me? Because you thought I had it too easy? You don't understand what it's like to struggle," she said, as if this justified everything. I thought of the nights I'd worked 2 jobs during college after they took my fund, the promotion I'd earned while taking unpaid leave to care for her, the apartment I'd lost because of their fraud. "You made sure I would know struggle," I said quietly. "Congratulations." Jamie finished the revised agreement, and my father signed it with a bitter flourish. My mother signed as witness. Dennis refused to look at me. As we prepared to leave, I had one final statement. "I'll be taking a step back from this family for a while. I need time to heal from this betrayal and determine what kind of relationship, if any, I want going forward." "You can't just abandon your family," my mother protested. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." I gathered my things and headed for the door. "I genuinely hope you all find whatever it is you're looking for. It's clearly not something I can provide." Walking out of that house felt like shedding a weight I'd carried for decades. In the car, I finally allowed the tears to come, not tears of defeat or desperation, but of relief and release. Aunt Susan was waiting as promised, and I nodded to let her know it was done. The agreement was signed, the confrontation was over, the truth was finally acknowledged, even if it wasn't embraced. "How do you feel?" she asked as we drove away. "Like I can finally breathe," I answered. And for the first time in months, it was true. 6 months after the confrontation, I stood at the base of the Eiffel Tower, watching as golden light illuminated the iconic structure against the deepening twilight sky. Around me, tourists jostled for photos while locals hurried past, unfazed by the landmark they saw every day. A gentle autumn breeze carried the scent of roasting chestnuts and the distant sounds of a street musician playing Edith Piaf. I was finally in Paris, not with my family, but by myself, and somehow, that felt exactly right. The path to this moment had been challenging, but transformative. My father had complied with the agreement, paying off the fraudulent loans and credit card within the 90-day time frame. I suspected Aunt Susan might have helped financially, though she never confirmed this. My credit score was slowly recovering, and the black mark of default had been removed from my report through the formal identity theft documentation process. The professional support system I'd built continued to be invaluable. Dr. Bennett and I met weekly, working through the complex grief of family estrangement and the guilt that occasionally surfaced despite my rational understanding of the situation. Jamie ensured all legal aspects were properly addressed, and my work mentor Lisa had championed a promotion that came with a significant raise, acknowledging the leadership I'd shown during a personal crisis. My relationship with my immediate family had taken the form of what Dr. Bennett called structured contact, limited, boundary-enforced interactions that protected my well-being while allowing for the possibility of evolution over time. My parents sent occasional emails, stilted and awkward but free of the manipulation that had characterized our previous communication. Dennis remained distant, still resentful of my boundary setting, while Heather sometimes reached out independently with tentative friendliness. The most surprising development had been the strengthening of relationships outside my nuclear family. Aunt Susan had become a genuine friend and mentor, My friendship circle had deepened as Alicia, Zoe, and others demonstrated what healthy support actually looked like. I'd even started a small support group for victims of family financial abuse, creating meaning from my painful experience. My solo trip to Paris represented more than just fulfilling a long-held dream. It was a reclaiming of my independence, a declaration that I deserved experiences that nourished my soul without having to justify or diminish them. Taking a seat on a bench, I opened my journal and wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. Journaling had become a daily practice, a way to process my ongoing journey and document my growth. Today's entry would be significant, marking 6 months since the confrontation and my first full day in Paris. I used to think family was defined by blood and obligation, I wrote. I believed love meant sacrifice, specifically my sacrifice. I measured my worth by how much I could give and how little I could take. Today, standing where I've dreamed of standing for years, I understand that true family is built on mutual respect and genuine care. Love should lift us up, not drain us dry. And self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential. As I continued writing, I reflected on how differently I now understood concepts I'd once taken for granted. Loyalty wasn't blind devotion to people who hurt you. It was standing by those who demonstrated their worthiness through actions, not just claims. Generosity wasn't depleting yourself to fill others' endless needs. It was giving from a place of fullness and authenticity, without expectation of praise or indebtedness. The journey hadn't been linear. There were still days when doubt crept in, when cultural messages about family first made me question my decisions. The first major holiday without my family had been particularly difficult, but each time I wavered, I returned to the evidence not just of their betrayal, but of my growth since setting boundaries. My apartment was now filled with books about Paris that I'd actually read rather than just displayed. My savings account was recovering, my sleep had improved dramatically. Colleagues commented on my increased confidence and creativity. These were the tangible benefits of choosing myself after a lifetime of being chosen last. As twilight deepened into night and the Eiffel Tower began its sparkling light show, I closed my journal and simply observed the joy around me, couples embracing, children pointing in wonder, friends laughing together. I felt connected to this moment, to this city I dreamed of for so long, in a way that would have been impossible if I'd come here still carrying the burden of toxic family dynamics. The next morning, I visited a small cafe near my rented apartment, ordering in the French I'd studied for years. The server smiled appreciatively at my effort, then responded in perfect English, a common Parisian interaction that made me laugh rather than feel embarrassed. Over breakfast, I drafted messages to the members of my support group back home, sharing photos and reflections from my trip. These connections, chosen family rather than assigned, had become the foundation of my new understanding of belonging. Each relationship was based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection rather than obligation or manipulation. My last day in Paris, I visited Montmartre, climbing the steps to Sacré-Cœur Basilica and gazing out over the city sprawled below. An elderly Frenchwoman sat beside me on a bench, and we struck up a conversation in my imperfect French and her limited English, managing to communicate despite the language barrier. "You are alone in Paris?" she asked, seeming concerned. "Je suis seule, mais pas solitaire," I replied, using a phrase I'd recently learned. "I am alone, but not lonely." She nodded approvingly. "C'est la différence importante." It was indeed an important difference, one that reflected my entire journey. I had removed myself from harmful relationships and experienced periods of genuine loneliness and doubt, but by choosing disconnection from toxicity, I had created space for authentic connection elsewhere. By setting boundaries around what I would accept, I had discovered my own capacity for joy independent of others' approval. On my flight home, I drafted one final Paris journal entry. "The most valuable thing I've learned through this painful family journey is that we cannot change others, but we can change how we respond to them. My parents and brother may never fully understand or acknowledge the harm they caused. They may never develop the capacity for the kind of relationship I deserve, and that's okay. My healing isn't dependent on their recognition or remorse." I used to think standing up for myself meant winning some sort of battle against them. Now I understand that true empowerment isn't about changing their behavior, it's about changing my response to it. It's about building a life defined by my values rather than their expectations. A life where no is a complete sentence and boundaries are expressions of self-respect, not weapons. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my family. What I do know is that whatever happens, I will face it from a place of strength and clarity rather than desperation and confusion. I am no longer willing to set myself on fire to keep others warm, and in that unwillingness, I have finally found peace. As the plane began its descent toward home, I felt a profound sense of closure. The Paris trip my family had taken without me had been a devastating betrayal, but my Paris trip had become a personal triumph, a declaration of independence. Their exclusion had been meant to hurt me. My solo journey had been an act of healing. Some family wounds never fully heal, and some relationships cannot be salvaged in the forms we once hoped for. But in accepting these painful truths, I had created space for joy, authenticity, and love defined by mutual respect rather than exploitation. In choosing my own well-being after a lifetime of neglecting it, I had discovered a capacity for happiness I never knew existed. This wasn't the end of my story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one written in my own hand, on my own terms, with clear-eyed awareness of my worth. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful transformation of all. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? What helped you stay strong when guilt or doubt crept in? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else currently going through a similar situation. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and healing, and share with anyone who might need to hear that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's sometimes the most necessary form of self-love. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth isn't determined by how much you give to those who only take.